and in particular, the video was specific to those in Tamana of the Urwari clan, and what we were treated to in that selected presentation was part of a festive event, and the offerings of bees honey, and also another attendant events in a particular part of the year in the calendar, where oranges are also offered to the deities. So we were able to observe some of the activity and how it unfolded in that capture. So as we said, this is part of an ongoing program, and what we had was just a sampling of what else needs to be done and will continue to be done in the manner of creating, or this manner of creating an archive. So this intangible cultural heritage, this is the way it goes. We trust you have enjoyed the refreshments, but we continue now, as the next of our speakers will come over here, and it's Nigel Nugawala, who's trained as an archivist, or as some people pronounce it, archivist, focusing on the history of the administration of archives in Sri Lanka. Also, human rights archiving, community-based approaches to the same, and on refiguring archival description for conflict-related collections. He's currently the archivist at the Collective for Historical Dialogue and Memory, the same which we mentioned earlier, CHDM, and he is an alumnus of the University of Edinburgh, and he read for a master's in politics, and as a Chevening scholar for an MA in Archives and Records Management at the University College in London. And he was recognized with an award, the Sir Hilary Jenkinson Prize, a few years ago in 2018. He's a member of the National Archives Advisory Council and the International Council on Archives, or the ICA, who in fact are the authors of the document that we are now looking at. So the topic, who is the Sri Lankan archivist? Nigel.
Respected members of the clergy, Honourable Minister, Nigel, distinguished guests, Director General of the Sri Lankan National Archives, staff of the Sri Lankan National Archives, ladies and gentlemen, and my fellow archivists. It is my distinct honour to speak with you on International Archives Day, a day that celebrates the value of archives and archivists, and the role that they play as noted by the International Council on Archives in accountability, transparency, democracy, heritage, memory, and society. We have, over the course of this afternoon, heard a great deal about archives and records. I have, however, chosen to speak about the archivist. Since implicit in archive matter, the title of this event is the labor performed by archivists, which is often rendered invisible, often previously misunderstood by those outside of our profession, and often, as J.W. Giovanni stated, the archivist is the unthanked worker of the engine without which the ship cannot move. My decision to speak about the profession also stems from the Universal Declaration on Archives' own prioritization of the role of archivists as trained professionals, serving their societies by supporting the creation of records and by selecting, maintaining, and making these records available for use. For those unfamiliar with those processes, which can be expanded as appraisal, selection, description, preservation, and public programming around archives. These are the few of the sort of core, power-laden activities that determine what enters archival repositories, what is kept for posterity, and what consumes the gaze of an archivist. This is precisely why the late Terry Cook argued that archivists are the co-creators of archives. It is the archivist who decides the significance or value of records. It is the archivist who selects collections for accession. It is the archivist who describes these collections, effectively writing the history of collections of records based on archival principles. It is the archivist and conservator and preservationist who ensure the longevity of records in all formats. And it is the archivist who, borrow a phrase from Sue McCamish and other records continuum scholars in Australia, that prepares archives to be activated for multiple purposes in society. I would also add that it is the archivist who must examine the gaps, absences, and silences in the collecting logics or logics of repositories, and then work systematically, sensitively, and collaboratively to fill them in. It is the archivist who must work with individuals and communities to ensure that they can find and preserve their histories in the corridors of power, patronage, and privilege. And it is the archivist who must stand up for the marginalized, the dispossessed, and the oppressed as equally important record makers, based on a commitment to the principles of equity, justice, diversity, and freedom. Now, what I have said may be a bit difficult for some of you to accept. Indeed, it divides many professions internationally. You may be asking yourselves, how are archivists supposed to do and be all of these things? Why is it even necessary? Aren't they just a bunch of file pushers and retrievers, glorified clerical workers, as someone once told me? If those questions do come to mind, then my unwavering response to you is that there never has really been a great deal of understanding about the work of an archivist in Sri Lanka and elsewhere. J.H.O. Paul is Ceylon's third government archivist, writing from that perspective in the early 1950s, stated that the duties, and I quote, the duties of an archivist are not widely understood in Ceylon. It is popularly supposed that he is some kind of research student employed to write historical works, or to turn out English translations of Dutch records. I hope 70 years later that there has been some gradual departure from this rather problematic view of my profession. However, at the same time, Paul's view of the archivist should also be challenged, since it is terribly passive. His supposition is that the archivist is responsible for ensuring the physical safety of records entrusted to his charge, and to prepare inventories, indices, and catalogs. I fear, though, that this view still perseveres. And the problem with it is the rigid placement of archivists as these inanimate guardians, servile officials who keep or take custody of records and then who work obediently to safeguard them. And it is this view, outdated and insular, that we must problematize. As I stand here today attempting to offer some ideas in response to the title of my talk, Who is a Sri Lankan Archivist, I must revisit 3 articles published in the 1960s and 1970s that had a profound impact on archival thinking and practice in Europe, North America, and elsewhere. The first is W.K. Lamb, the Dominion archivist of Canada, who argued in his article that the role of the archivist has changed. Now, this is as early as the 1950s, 1960s. The role of the archivist has changed in that he, she, they are no longer primarily a custodian, but an active gatherer of records. The second is Howard Zinn, the radical historian, who argued that the supposed neutrality of the archivist is a fake. and indeed many professions. That our role is inherently political in that it is an exercise of power. And that in his famous words, we need to focus on humanizing an inevitably political craft. And the third is Gerald Ham, the state archivist of Wisconsin, who argued that we need active archivists, collecting the broad spectrum of human experience and helping people understand the world they live in. I have been trying to locate, in my research, some residual impact that these articles may have had in Sri Lanka, but thus far my search for any substantive discussions and thinking about the profession has turned up in. And where exactly are we today? Can we even have these conversations? We hardly have what we can call an archives and records management profession in the country. There are, at my last count, only 3 or 4 trained archivists and records managers at the master's level. We are not producing cohorts of trained archivists and records managers every year. There is no professional association. There is no specialized diploma or master's program in archives and records management at the information departments of our universities. It is incredulous that since 1902, since the appointment of R.G. as archivist, up until now, archival education has not been a priority. How do we build a profession and advance the discipline without a body of trained professionals? But internationally, archival education began much earlier. For example, in the 19th century in both Germany and France, and professional associations have sprung up in most countries with a vibrant history of organizing, publishing, and educating. The signals of change that I spoke about earlier in the 1960s and 70s turned into full-blown movements in theory. Sharp archival turn attempting to dispel and displace the classical conceptions of archiving. The colonial inheritances of archival ideas and principles, the manuals of practice that do very little to capture the complexities of creation, collecting, and experience. It is from this work, the label of archivists and archival scholars, that I sketch who the Sri Lankan archivist could be, but not necessarily everything and everyone all at once. I offer 4 characterizations, and I think this will help us meet the challenges that we are facing in our country today. Firstly, I believe the Sri Lankan archivist must be an active archivist. In the words of Andrew Flynn and Ben Alexander, archival scholars, the active archivist rejects neutrality and passivity and acknowledges the role of the record keeper in actively participating in the creation, management, and pluralization of archives. It is vital that we have more interventionary attempts to record different communities, groups, and experiences and memories in our country. I often think about the records of COVID. For example, what would they tell us? Will the everyday experiences of people be documented? Will we learn about the impacts of certain policies and decisions on individuals and communities? Or will the record be a sanitized one? Secondly, I believe the Sri Lankan archivist must be a healer. We should acknowledge that the harms suffered by all communities as a result of the colonial mission and the multiple conflicts of the post-independence period must animate a multiplicity of archival imperatives in post-war Sri Lanka. Inconvenient histories, difficult histories, traumatic histories, if we follow Louis Joanet's line of thinking, are part of our heritage. Archivists must be at the forefront of efforts to use the power of records to heal, to repair, to recover truths, and to deliver justice. Thirdly, I believe the Sri Lankan archivist must be a trained professional, but one working collaboratively and sharing knowledge with allies in other disciplines who are also involved in archival labor. I make this point cautiously because if I privilege the trained perspective, would be alienating comrades around the country working committedly to serve their societies by preserving records that exist. But the trained archivist today, in most contexts, is taught the value of interdisciplinary thinking and practice, and is unlearning, questioning, reimagining, and building new modes of practice. Our labor, when shared, is more meaningful and impactful. Finally, the Sri Lankan archivist must be a contributor to evolving and multiple conceptions of archived records and archivists that come out of this country. We need to register our expertise, our experiences, and our own intellectual history in order to contribute to these reimaginings and reconstructions of archival practice and theory that many around the world are engaged in today. The challenges are numerous, but as I look around the room today, I see many allies who can help us address some of the issues I've raised. The Universal Declaration recognizes the collective responsibility of all, every single one of you, in the management of archives. A more representative national archives, stronger independent archives, cohorts of trained archivists coming out of our universities, and regional and national professional associations can only strengthen the information and memory apparatus of our country. So the next question is, who then will stand with us? Archivists matter.